Welcome to an episode of Vidhi, Footprints and Sands of Time. This is a tale of survivors and achievers.
Hello and good morning. So it's an absolute honor to have none other than Dr. Paul Salins with us here today in our podcast, which is called Vidhi, the Footprints of the Sands of Time. Dr. Paul, you're a medical director of the Mazumdar Cancer Center and an internationally acclaimed Cranio-Maxillofacial surgeon who's an inspiration to many of us. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation to do this podcast today with us. Your life's rich experiences is a galore of what many can only imagine. Art, medicine and music, the amalgamation of all these creates such a wonderful aura in your life. We wish to explore more through the lens of Vidhi, our podcast.
Thank you for doing this for us, sir. They say childhood makes a person who they are. So we would like to get your thoughts on what does childhood remind you of when you sit back and think now?
My childhood, first and foremost, I must say, I was very happy. And I was born when my mother was quite old. Okay, so I did not have much exposure to children going about and so on and so forth. But two things I think stand out. One is it was a home where they brought us all up in the fear of God, and also taught, Jesus said that what you do to the least one of my people, you have done none to me. So from the very beginning, I was taught that we have to treat the servants, treat this one as though we were doing it to Jesus, as it were. You understand?
Yes.
So very early I learned that we could not be sort of, you had to be very considerate. Then my mother, so my father was an evangelist, so we had very little, he was traveling all over the world, so we did not have much. But my mother, as a doctor, taught me a great lesson which has continued to this day. That to be a doctor is not just to treat human beings, but to make an impact in their lives. Because what my mother did was, I have seen, ladies whose husbands beat them up, being put in this one and cared for. And my mother talking to the husband sometimes will get drunk, because many of them were alcoholic. They would come and shout. But my mother had such an authority that when she came out and talked, night, at 11 o'clock they will be making noise outside the house. But my mother, who was such a short lady, she would come out. As soon as they came, they would just say, Doctor, they will say, we are very sorry. Then my mother will say, you have to kneel down and ask God's forgiveness, and you promise me that you will not beat your wife again. If you do that, I'll not allow your wife to listen. The wife will say, because she have something like that. And I realized that as a doctor, you can have a profound influence, not just on, it is not about just treating diseases, but actually impacting lives. Also, in those days, I learned another great lesson which helped me, if you ask me, is that in those days, a lot of limitations of medicine. It was not, particularly in a mission hospital, you did not have the sophisticated thing. But the caring for the patients, the responsibility they took for the patient. I remember many times they would, if they could not solve the problem, they knelt down and prayed to God.
Right.
Because what to do? And they did miracles.
Right.
And what was lacking in the medical service, they made up in terms of the compassion and the quality of care they provide. That is why these mission hospitals developed the culture of caring. When this institution, our own, this large institution, it's a corporate structure. Probably the reason Dr. Devi Shetty and Dr. Kiran Mazumdar asked me to come and lead this, because I had absolutely no experience, was that I brought the culture of a mission hospital and the scientific vigor of a scientist and also an engineer into the whole scheme of things. And to me, if you ask me, what is the single most important thing that was, I would say, is that they always overcame problems if they were desperate. They knelt down and prayed, and somehow they would get the wisdom to do the right thing. You see, and as a scientist, now I think that if you ask me, even today, only other day we had a big problem with one patient bleeding, and some VIP, some difficulties. And I again, I continue to pray when we have, and I have made it a practice, irrespective of how you think about it. And these were the ones which actually really grounded. When we were building this institution also, I was totally unqualified I had never in my life built a hospital. After that, what some chota-mota small cranio-facial unit. It's a very tiny unit compared to a massive institution such as this, multispecialty. But in all these cases, I learned that you can always reach out beyond your self. If you feel with God's help. That is the guiding principle I have.
Absolutely. What was your twisted training for surgery, sir? Because dentistry, surgery, and then because we all know that, at least for us youngsters, the emphasis on training is so much before you start out on your own to do it. So what is your twist?
Did you train the mind or did you train the techniques?
I do not think there is the correct way to do it is, see, if you learn how to understand problems, techniques present themselves. If you only teach technique, in the sense how to do this, there is a place for it. Techniques are very, very necessary. But if you create a very fine equipment of the mind, of your mind, that means you can navigate multiple spheres. See, any problem solving cannot be done within the compass of that issue alone. The data, now I deal with artificial intelligence, that's one of my major work now. If you look at artificial intelligence, if the quantum of it is the knowable constitutes the sum total of the data with which you are going to address to solve a problem, you will be always limited, because that means ABC, you are putting it as CBA or BAC. You see, that means how can you find an innovation or an innovative solution beyond that? You are continuously constrained by the limits of the vocabulary which is actually within the data.
Correct.
So, training the mind means how do you navigate through multiple different structures of thinking. That's why I give so much emphasis that our people here, they have to have an appreciation of literature. Why? Literature and poetry gives you an understanding about metaphoric thinking. Metaphors, when we use a metaphor in poetry, when you say, oh, your face is like a moon, beautiful like a moon, it's not a moon. It is evocative of something. That means you are transposing an idea which is in the moon to a person. So there is it is so when ideas, when you are dealing with ideas, let us say that this is a simple problem of how do you modify a technique to a particular problem. You are able to transpose ideas from different, and in terms of the construct of the brain, the richer the ecosystem within your brain, the multiple levels of thinking that you have, it will actually create two things. First, you will not be narrow-minded. Much of the problems we find with political struggles and all, if the sum total of your vocabulary is only maxillofacial, the probability that you will be always struggling and fighting within that particular thing. But if you expand the vocabulary and be able to see, that's why I asked you when you came to this stream, what did you see? What are all the things that you found? From the contour here, the way we do, the paintings are there. And why do we create such a... Because we would like to see that when you sit here, you are inspired. Every day, why I put a work of art?
Right.
In the colors, in the multiple complex interactions, it challenges your thinking. You see?
Absolutely.
But at the same time, the room is a comfortable room. You can see outside, and I think that is very important. And to me, training maxillofacial surgery, if you give me, I will actually, first and foremost, I would teach them to appreciate poetry, appreciate structures of classical music. I will appreciate beauty, first and foremost. And secondly, how to really be comfortable with themselves.
Right.
Most people are not comfortable with themselves. They are always running behind something. That's why ambition, and ambition is very, very good. Without ambition, you cannot. But to me, that is far more important. Here, I will not teach technique. I only expect them to discuss problems with me in multiple ways. And I give more credit for them appreciating artwork or music, or go and a proposition in engineering, or a proposition in, say, let us say, accident and emergency, and how the patient flow within the building. I really want our people to look at it. In fact, for instance, right now, we have Dr. Sam. And what I told him, I told him, you have to develop a cranio-facial unit. He said, you will have to cut on this, I think. He said, I will do a 20 bed. So I said, I will fire you, because it's not. So now, I told him, let us now start planning a 200 bed head and neck unit, which will have cranio-facial, otolaryngology, larynx, and everything. And also cranio-facial surgery.
Right.
As soon as you think about a 200 bed, the excitement creeps in. If I had told 20, is it exciting?
No.
Not at all. In a donkey will do a 20 bed cranio-facial unit. 200 bed, it produces a challenge.
Yeah.
Then you have to think in so many ways. In front of architecture, what will it constitute, what will put in it, what is the business plan, how return on investment, what should be the investment, how. Now we really are excited to develop it. If it was 20 bed, I would not have invested. Now all of us has to invest thinking into doing it. Other day I went to speak to his boss in Ranipet. And he was speaking to somebody. He said, we are thinking of a 300 bed unit. This is how this institution was built. We started with an idea for a 300 bed cancer unit. I am not a head of a cancer unit. Cancer is embedded here. I am a head of a multispecialty, one of the largest, it is later on we will go and show you, and a research center. See, if it was 200 bed, 300 bed cancer unit, we would have been very constrained in the vocabulary of your thinking. As soon as I was told, whether we should go for a world's largest cancer center or a huge multispecialty hospital, which will, it's very exciting, you see. So I think the problem you have to, at least from my standpoint, if you take small challenges and country, I will develop a cleft unit, or I will do an orthodontic surgery unit. Mainly the problem in maxillofacial, I find, is that people think small things. It is not exciting.
Right.
Yeah.
Really, everybody in my unit, I teach them, if at all, one thing is to have great expectations. Then it is an exciting problem. Now, another unit head in my unit, he wants to go to Northeast and develop a big cranio-facial unit. You see, I am excited. That's what I want. Yeah.
Right.
Not that if they came and told me, sir, we would like to develop a whole cancer institute, a multispecialty hospital, I would be thrilled. Because what is the big deal about, 20 bed, see, incremental changes occur. If you work very hard, where 100% of your work, you can actually do 120% work. You see.
Right.
100% you will have a 20 bed unit. It's not a big, it is an incremental change. But if you want to do a transformative work, as Kiran says, you have to think in terms of exponential development. And if you really, for you people also, I'm not, forget about the podcast, but for you also, if you are coming and thinking, oh, we will develop 10, 15 beds, okay, fine. You will always life struggle and you will be in the rat race. But if the vision expands to encompass, say, I will develop a 200 bed head and neck unit, that is my vision plan, then your thinking process completely gets energized. You are no longer thinking in small terminologies. Or if you say, oh, my vision is to be president of the association, let's say. It's okay. You have one goal. But you always are working in a highly, I would say, populated area. Everybody is thinking of the same thing. You will have 20 people fighting for that. But how many people are thinking about a 200 bed head and neck unit? You see, we are thinking. That completely changes your approach and you will automatically become a great cranio-facial surgeon. Because you are thinking not about a small unit. Even when I was in Dharwad with a Chota Mota unit with hardly no blood bank or something, I always dreamt about making it an international center from the beginning. So you never can work within the constraints of a small process. So that's the message. Okay.
So we see that you are a person with many personalities. In the sense, you have so many passions. You are an avid reader. You hold a degree in art and culture from the Harvard. You are an artist, of course. We hear so many things about you. How do you keep all of it going, sir, in your busy schedule? How do thoughts come to your head, and how do you give them? How do you get it into action?
Okay. Today morning, for instance, when I got up, I listened to one of the fugues and one of the toccata and fugue of Bach. Okay, I did very little. Early morning I get up usually, much earlier. By 4:30 I am up, but usually I have a cup of coffee and I listen to Bach's. What it does is it helps you grasp it sort of aligns your intellectual thing, and also you have to teach yourself not to be running behind small things. I also get little. It needs some thinking early in the morning. I should not be vindictive against somebody. Okay. What are all the problems I am going to face today? I have several meetings, a lot of problems we have to solve. How do I address them? Before I encounter them in the quietness of my own room and listening to some sublime classical music, say music of Bach, to me that makes a lot of sense. And in that atmosphere, when you actually address them, they do not seem insurmountable. Some of the human issues that I have to deal with are horrendous. But in a sense, I have solved them before I come here. Sometimes I have, later on you go down and see, majority of the cases which come here are extremely complex. Nobody will refer cases here because they are simple. But where a new solution has to be found, that requires you do not look at it with that problem. You look at away from that problem in the detail. To me, I do that. And usually I will do a little bit of painting, maybe 5 minutes. Not because painting and fishing are two processes where you have time where you are doing something creative, but it also gives you a chance to think. So I do not think of this I look up at art and music as friends, as tools which equip your mind to be what you are. Otherwise, I came as a medical director and I'm going to research. I think you should not use power. You should use authority. You see, if people here, if I went around, ordering people here, no, Dr. Timapandi, I have great affection for him, you follow? So we work together in great harmony. And he knows that I will go out of my way to do something to make the neurosurgery in this institution a great institution. If that is there, you see, then you do not think in terms of small questions.
Right.
You see, and really, in fact, I fight with him for there should be more show for that board outside from the day, I don't know, for several years, I said, you have the institute. Now we have got money, we will create a research institute. So, you follow that, the thinking. And as long as things are bigger than your smallness, then you are liberated. To me, that is the thing. First, I really think of God, because there's something way beyond ourselves. To other people, you have to think of them as being, Timur and all that is a great privilege for me. I never think of it as a medical director. To me, he is a great friend and a counselor. Same thing, our anesthesia team, if you call, they will come and they will laugh here. Why they are the head of the anesthesia and all that? Because there is so much respect and regard. If you have that, then there is no politics.
Right.
You see, it's really, I really have affection for our people. Yeah, that's why I am very proud of them, and we will do everything under the sun to help them.
Absolutely. Wonderful to hear that the whole environment and the value system that has been created in this institution is something which we all can get inspired about.
I think you should. At least to me, that is the formula.
Right, sir.
Yeah.
Definitely. How do you see the healthcare system in India changing? From where you said you made a small cranio-facial unit and now we're seeing it a 1,000-bed hospital. And how can young doctors like us actually contribute towards that? Because we see the next 20, 30 years.
Yeah.
And
US is, if you thought to yourself every day as I will learn a sagittal split, I will do. It is I just now illustrated to you, what is the vision, how much if you are only thinking about that. See, as far as the healthcare is concerned, we are actually going through a very, very important phase. Mm-hmm. The work that I am moving away from the classical paradigms of healthcare. Till now, it was a physician and hospital-centric healthcare. Now, it has to change. Now, it will become a technology-led healthcare.
Okay.
Because, see, the paradigm shift in engineering and mathematics is unbelievable.
Huge.
Because if you see the way technology is moving, it is doing unbelievable strides. Now, applications of technology in medicine has also, but essentially our thinking process, although we say that we have become extremely sophisticated in healthcare, our practice systems still remain very traditional. Now, if in India or anywhere in the world, what is really happening is, so far it was a physician-centric and a hospital-centric healthcare. Now it will move to a personal-centric and a community-centric healthcare. And I think the significance of hospitals will reduce, not significance, the need for hospitals should become compressed. And if at all COVID has taught us something, that we cannot be dependent on hospitals. We have to develop a way in which the hospitals can get into the homes and also how technology. So till now it was led by medical capabilities of medical science.
Right.
But we now know that a disease-centric paradigm is not correct. Because if you are running much of my work is now on how do we actually move from what is the technology that can be actually brought in to understand health. Because health is not a static process. When you are aging, your state of health changes. When you have a pandemic, it changes. When you have psychological or stress or anything. So our understanding of health should understand how do we actually create a qualitative living and what are the shifts that are taking place within the health. How do we actually identify and diagnose shifts within health and how do we equip people to actually take the intellectual and physical demands. That is totally a different paradigm. If you do not equip people to psychologically and physically take their demands in healthcare, in maintenance of health, you end up with a big problem. You end up with stress. And
Right.
that actually leads to disease. And now we know that much of the diseases are chronic disorders. And chronic disorders fall under two categories. They are either related to aging or lifestyle choices. So now we are entering into a completely exciting where we begin to utilize technology and come to solutions which are actually based upon that.
So there's a popular belief among many doctors, and you also touched upon it in the earlier question. It says, I treat, he heals. What are your thoughts on that? What is the power of the unknown force that we see in our daily lives?
See, let us completely take a human being is extremely, if you ask me in two sentences to describe as a scientist, as an engineer, my primary work is in mathematical. If you really understand, you get an extremely complex paradox in biological systems. If you apply systems engineering principles to human beings, you begin to realize that we are a hyper-redundant, we are a highly complex adaptive system. That means we adapt it.
To change.
And secondly, even biological system, even a car is constantly adapting. Every time you are going up a hill or coming down and everything, the system is built as a system,
Right.
not as an engineering system. We are highly adaptive, but we have tremendous amount of hyper redundancy. That is why you can take half the tongue, still you can swallow and talk. You can take sometimes complete tongue and put a block, still you are able to do. This hyper redundancy is a great capacity. That's why most of our surgery and most of our medicine, it actually constrains our capability. But because of hyper redundancy, we function, still are able to function. So the success of medicine very often is based on this zone of hyper redundancy and healing that we were self-healing mechanisms. But we have also a problem because in all other engineering systems, hyper-redundancy, functional hyper-redundancy, hyper-redundancy is we equip it with the increase in structural elements. For instance, if you see a Gothic architecture, you see the structure is supported by flying buttresses. What are the flying buttresses? They actually neutralize the outward thrust. So you have put extra structural elements to support the wall. So when the roof comes, you see there's an outward thrust that is balanced by flying buttresses. So you are able to make the walls very thin and go up. That is the philosophy in the case of an engineering principle. So structural elements have, but except in the biological systems. In our systems, the quantum of structural elements which allow hyper-redundancy is very small. So the ratio of the structural elements to your functional performance is very small. That means it is paradoxical. You have tremendous amount of hyperredundancy. Your tongue is able to do unbelievable things. Okay? For instance, tongue, let's consider, it is a viscoelastic continuum, and it actually works in multiple complex ways. So that complexity is made possible with very small amount of structural elements. See, that is a mystery, in the sense that that is the most interesting challenge that we have in the kinematics of function. We have investigated about kinematics and so on and so forth. So the future of even maxillofacial surgery, to me, is in understanding. So the future of whole healthcare will occur, because currently we have actually been dependent only on the hyper-redundancy in our systems, with very disregard for the structural element. We have never understood the engineering elements. So we have just took advantage of the hyper-redundancy in biological performance. Now the future is we become engineers. We start looking at it from architectural, in kinematics of function, and we are already thinking in those directions. That will completely transform surgery. It will completely transform medicine and healthcare. Healthcare also, we will no longer be depending on doctors. We will be looking on technology, because we have changed the vocabulary of thinking from purely molecular and biological limitations to not artificial intelligence in the processes, applications, but in terms of your structure. How do we organize this structure? Anatomy no longer becomes a descriptive anatomy, but it becomes an engineering anatomy. That is far more exciting. I mean, if I were to sit and discuss with you, just anyone you ask me, you describe to me lip, or you describe to me nasal septum, or describe to me one shelf of the palate, it's unbelievable. Or if you describe to me coronary circulation, you describe to me how diastolic time, when it is reducing, the demand of oxygen is increasing in the heart, because systolic time increases, diastolic time reduces, but the perfusion of the myocardium is in the diastolic time. How do you work out homeometric and heterometric understanding of the Starling's law? You see, it's and why should there be a pulsatile flow, not a continuum flow? You see, how there should be a transition phase in the hemoglobin, in fetal hemoglobin. Why does it have a transition sign when we are having extraplacental circulation? See, this is what drives our hospital. This thought processes. I mean, to me, it really is exciting to tell you. Now, after you finish the next discussions I shall have, we will be actually negotiating many of these problems. Similarly, in the pharmaceutical chemistry. Okay.
The perspective that you have given us has opened us our minds, I'm sure, for a lot of things that we want to do next. Lastly, sir, what legacy would you like to leave behind? Because our whole basis is the footprints on the sands of time. So the legacy that you would wish to leave behind for the future to see?
I think if I have said few people I have impacted their lives, your legacy is it can be only, I think, in three things. One is that if I have left a spiritual awareness, if people said Dr. Paul actually lived in fear of God, to me the life of Jesus has actually been a model. Although I am not religious, I am not at all a very religious person, but I understand sacrifice. I understand pain. The life of Jesus has taught me that if God has to come and suffer and we misunderstood humanity, what is the big deal about us being misunderstood? So to me, that life has been a great inspiration. To me, I would like people to, the legacy to think that he always was a man who emphasized that we are only instruments. Secondly, if as a scientist, despite all the contributions, I really would like to think that I changed the paradigms of thinking, and that did not diminish my understanding that is superior intelligence of an extraordinary nature. And I am, for instance, I am investigating noise. You understand? Noise. The amount of data mismatch that we see. But noise actually we are beginning to now appreciate that noise is extremely important, because it is the noise which actually determines. We actually investigate a very tiny slice, even black matter and the matter that we understand constitutes that means the quantum of known and knowable elements with which even Hawkins has to make his calculations is so incomplete, so inadequate, you cannot pontificate on anything. That is why, to me, the presence of God. So, to me, that. Secondly, I would like to think that at least in my students who have actually followed, take from me, I know I'm very ferocious, I'm very nasty, I know people will say you're shouting at them. But at some time when I started in Dharwad and all that, it was extremely primitive. We did not have blood bank, we did not have CT, we did not have many of the things which you have. So the students I had to be such a ferocious person to ensure that any error, even in blood cross-matching, our students used to do, MDS students. So I knew the limitations of a dental curriculum. And I knew that if I allowed them to live with their weaknesses, we would never be able to beat. That's why I had to be extremely harsh to my students, so that they learned never to compromise on things, because they never could afford the luxury of being shouted at by me if they made an error. So we had no opportunity to allow errors. Right. And that's why I had to be extremely tough. Do I regret it? No, I don't regret it. I think I taught them resilience. And I taught them to do things way beyond they would have ever dreamt as dental students. I changed I destroyed the mindset of the dental maxillofacial curriculum. Destroyed it. I never allowed, cleft lip, big deal. No. That is one component of the thing. As a consequence, they all became so good in so many ways. That is the most important. So the second legacy is internal. Thirdly, I have been greatly privileged by Kiran Mazumdar and Devi Shetty to develop. Whenever I walk, this is my baby, you see. I have broken the ground, conceived the idea, brought the doctors, and to me it is. And now I think I will make a legacy in mathematics, because it has always been, it is how do we create new paradigms of thinking. So to me, this will be the most important legacy.
Wonderful.
I think it's a human encyclopedia that we were with. Thank you so much for your time, sir. And we are privileged. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much.
Vidhi, the podcast is dedicated to tales of healing and facilitators of health and well-being. This is a Mukha Facial Surgery initiative produced and brought to you by Dr. Girish Rao and Mrs. Sujatha Girish. Podcast is hosted by Dr. Sri Gauri and Dr. Sai Swaroop. Thank you for listening.